Stress eating and cravings are not just about willpower. Stress is sabotaging your fitness goals in more ways than you can think of, and today we're going to talk about the science behind that. Hello everyone, my name is Clementina and welcome back to my channel. I do health and wellness content here on YouTube. I also graduated with a bachelor's degree in nutrition sciences and recently with a master's degree in food chemistry. Today we're going to dive deep into the topic of stress and how especially chronic stress impacts your hormonal levels, also your hunger levels, how your body responds to it, and how you can fix that. Stress experiences can be both emotionally and physiologically challenging. When I say emotionally, I mean that you underwent a stressful situation such as the loss of a job, the loss of a loved one, also some kind of interpersonal conflicts. And when I mention physiological stress, that would mean drug withdrawal, for instance, or also some kinds of chronic illness, severe food restriction over a longer period of time. Acute stress can actually be good for you. It activates some adaptive responses. It also stimulates the release of dopamine. Dopamine is not only responsible for reward pathways, it is also responsible for drive and motivation. It is a very important neurotransmitter. Chronic periods of stress can weaken these adaptive systems, decrease your dopamine responses and release over a longer periods of time, and also increase susceptibility to disease. Of course, the perception of stress relies on different aspects that also include personality traits and the current emotional state. In humans, different responses in terms of eating habits to stress have been observed. Around 40% of the people tend to increase their food intake, 40% of people decrease their food intake, while 20% do not seem to alter their food intake as a response to stress. These differences in behavior could be to the different types of stressors or also to the duration and the intensity of the stress response. The researchers suggest that acute stress could lead to an increase in the food intake, while chronic severe stress could lead to a decrease in the food intake. I am pretty sure that you're already familiar with the fact that cortisol is the hormone that is being released when you are stressed. The first evidence around cortisol and its connection to obesity emerged when researchers were investigating the so-called Cushing's syndrome, which is a condition that is related to the increased production of glucocorticoids. One of those hormones is cortisol. This condition manifests with increased fat retention, so obesity, but mainly in the upper body and also the abdominal area and the upper back, also glucose intolerance and hypertension, so high blood pressure. Repeated and uncontrollable stress over longer periods of time can lead to overstimulation and dysregulation eventually of the HPA axis. This is the axis that's connected to the regulation and to the release also of many hormones, but in this case stress-related hormones. A prolonged activation of this axis can lead to alterations in glucose metabolism, also promote insulin resistance and alter the release of multiple satiety and hunger-promoting related hormones. In connection to cortisol, cortisol is suggested to be promoting food intake during periods of recovery from stress. Chronic periods of stress also tend to be one of the risk factors for the development of different kinds of addictions. Both drugs and foods activate similar pathways in the brain that are related to the release of dopamine and also to these kinds of rewarding effects. And for humans and both for animals, these pathways tend to be activated mostly from foods that are high in fat or sugar. These are the foods that both animals and humans tend to divert towards to when they are being exposed to chronic stress. Such high-fat, high-sugar foods are usually fast food, snacks. They're also all generally very calorie dense, so with a high amount of calories per gram. And these behaviors are observed also in the absence of a physiological need for calories. Or even if the subject is not hungry, these behaviors are also observed more often in overweight and obese individuals than in lean individuals. This could be also due to other hormonal issues related to satiety that overweight and obese individuals have, such as leptin resistance, so their inability to register a signal from leptin hormone circulating in their blood that regulate their satiety. So why do humans and animals tend to reach for those foods? There was one animal study that was done on rats. They were being exposed to 5 days of chronic stress, and the control group was not exposed to this stress, and they were able to reach towards different kinds of foods. There was a chow diet and also sugar and also lard. If you're not familiar what lard is, this is generally just fat. It's very dense fat. And the rats that were exposed to these chronic stress conditions, of course, reached more towards the high sugar, high fat foods that they were given. Another study found that rats that were chronically stressed because they were separated from their mothers at birth also reached for those kinds of foods, and the response that these foods also produced in their bodies is that they decreased their stress levels, which led to temporary improvement of their mental situation. If the same experience is observed in humans, this would provide an explanation to the coping behaviors that humans develop and why do they also get addicted to those kinds of foods when they are feeling mentally low or when they are also suffering from depression. However, the increased consumptions of such high fat, high sugar foods long term leads to, a variety of metabolic diseases and to an increased fat deposition. Chronic stressors are also known to leave sometimes traces after an individual has been exposed to that for a long period of time. This leads to an abnormal function of, again, this HPA axis that I mentioned, and also of the release of the so-called ACTH hormone, which is also observed in patients that suffer from the post-traumatic stress disorder. I already mentioned in the beginning of this video that short periods of stress can stimulate dopamine release, while long periods of stress can actually decrease dopamine release over time. This was actually observed in an animal study as well that was done in rats. If an individual consumes kind of coping mechanism diet, high sugar, high fat diet, this effect actually gets worse. Since these rats, they were divided in 2 groups. The first group was fed on normal diets and the second group was fed this kind of high fat, high sugar diet, and they were being exposed to 26-hour food deprivation. They were not being fed anything, and the dopamine release from the rat group that had the coping mechanism diet was a lot lower than for the other group that was being fed a normal diet. This also supports the fact that these kinds of foods have some activate these rewarding pathways and could have an addicting nature to them. These rats also exhibited signs of withdrawal symptoms when they were not being fed those kinds of foods, and also patterns of copious consumption. Now we're going to cover some other stressors that could impact negatively your eating habits. And the first one, I think this is very relevant right now, is restricted eating. So restricted eating refers to the very cognitive, so completely planned out restriction of energy intake or specific food groups. Longer periods of the performance of such a routine could lead to an increase in cortisol levels. When comparing restrictive eaters with non-restrictive eaters exposed to an acute stress period, the non-restrictive eaters actually decreased their food consumption, while the restrictive eaters tended to increase their food consumption. Researchers suggest that this could be due to an increase in cortisol because of the high cognitive restraint. Your brain is getting stressed out from needing to control your eating behaviors all of the time. This also decreases the capacity of your body to cope with stress when it's already being stressed in the background from these mental processes that you're undergoing every day. Of course, that does not mean that restraint is always bad. Scientists claim that while flexible restraint tends to lead to a better weight management over time and also increased abstainment from those kinds of very high fat, high sugar, non-nutritious foods, rigid restraint actually increases the sensitivity to those foods. So you're kind of craving them more when you're not allowing yourself to have them from time to time. It was also suggested that people that are being so restrictive all of the time are also not in tune with the physiological cues of their body that are related to hunger and satiety. You're not really aware of the signals that your body is sending you. All of these increased stress, decreased capability of your body to deal with the stress, combined with, let's say, some kind of another stress that you experience at the time, could lead to a decrease in your ability to control yourself and could promote overeating. This could lead to binge eating cycle, so you're being restrictive of yourself for a period of time, and then imagine something other happens in your life which leads you to binge eat, and then on the next day you try to restrict yourself again, and this could really lead to a vicious cycle. One solution to this problem would be to try to get more in tune with your body and try to practice intuitive eating. I actually want to do a video on intuitive eating. It's probably going to be my next or the one after the next video that I'm making. A personal opinion of mine is that for people for who intuitive eating sounds very good in theory but not very good in practice, because your intuition is telling you to, I don't know, eat the most non-nutritious foods in largest amounts, or you believe that intuition is telling you that you're not worthy of food today. This is not your intuition, those are your behaviors that you have not unlearned yet, and also dysregulated hormonal systems. Another strategy would be to start with the diet breaks. First of all, it's very science-backed that it works long-term for weight management, and diet breaks does not mean that you're getting 1 week of cheat meals. It just means that for 1 week, let's say, you're not restricting and you're eating at maintenance. And I believe that these periods of time could really be a start and help you get more in tune with your body's signals that tell you when you should eat and when you should stop eating. Now we're moving on to another common stressor. This is sleep deprivation, and sleep is actually one of the most common stressors. Sleep deprivation has been proven to contribute to increased risks of both obesity and different metabolic diseases. In the United States, most of the adults, the average adult, sleeps around 5 to 6 hours every night, which is far from the recommendation of 8 hours or even 7 hours if that sounds more realistic to you. Studies have reported that a decrease in the sleep duration correlates with an increase in the ghrelin levels, so in the hunger hormone levels. Sleep duration positively correlates with the release of leptin, so the satiety hormone levels. This probably explains why when you're sleep deprived, you feel that your hunger is elevated throughout the entire day. Secondly, in individuals that have been undergoing chronic sleep deprivation, abnormally low circulating leptin levels have been observed between 15 and 70% of what their total fat body mass would be predicting for. Another weird finding is that daytime sleep duration, so naps, were positively correlated with an increase in the food intake, but the same was not observed for nocturnal sleep duration. So if you're napping more, you would be hungrier. And finally, I want to just cover a study that investigates how relief from stress can positively impact your eating habits. These researchers gathered a group of women. The group was 60 female patients with obesity that were reporting to suffer from emotional eating. These 60 patients had to follow a 3-week relaxation protocol. They were divided into 3 groups. The one was the control group, and then we had 2 groups. One group had this relaxation protocol. I suppose it was some kind of a meditation protocol, and some of them just were having an imagination protocol, so they did not watch anything. I guess it was kind of like a guided meditation thing. And the other group had a virtual reality protocol, so I guess they were having glasses or some kind of a headset. They were 12 individual relaxation trainings in total. The study found that in all of the patients that underwent these relaxation kind of meditation processes, all of them had lost relatively the same amount of weight, and more importantly, they were reporting to feel more in control of their eating, also generally an improved mental state, a decrease in depression and anxiety symptoms, and their emotional eating episodes were also greatly reduced. These effects were observed more strongly in the group with the virtual reality meditations compared to the imagination protocol. However, both groups had lost relatively the same amount of weight. You don't necessarily have to get like a virtual headset to decrease your stress. Like a basic guided meditation with imagination protocols would do the job as well. But I wanted to explain this study just to say that a decrease through such a simple methods in your overall stress levels could really have a very positive impact on your emotional well-being, which therefore results in improvement also in your eating habits. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that you learned something new today, and let me know down in the comments if there is some kind of a topic that you want me to do a specific video on. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel, and I will be seeing you next time.